Hey everybody, so I'm picking up on page 124, but just to recall what we read last week. Remember that Guy was called to the fire at his own house, and so he had to burn down his own house, and Beatty chose to have him do it with a flamethrower instead of kerosene like they usually do. So he has to burn down his own house because they discovered he has books. And after he burns down his house, they're sitting outside the house, and Beatty realizes that Montag is hearing something in his ear, and Montag actually gets up to run away, and Beatty hits him with something, and Montag falls down, and the earbud pops out that Faber was talking to him through. And so once he loses that earbud, Beatty picks it up and says, "Yes, we'll drop in on your friend." And what does he mean by "we'll drop in on your friend"? They're going to find out where Faber lives and go to his house. And so Montag says, "No." And then he looks down at his hands, realizes he has a flamethrower in them, and decides that instead of letting you go drop in on Faber, I'm going to burn you alive. So he ends up burning Beatty alive. So if you weren't here, that's what you missed. A little bit later on, he has to run away because now, of course, first he knocked out the other two firemen that were there. But then as he runs away, he did get partially injected by the Hound. He ends up destroying the Hound as well with the flamethrower, but the Hound does get a tiny bit of injection into his leg, so his leg is super numb. He runs away. He has to cross a 10-lane superhighway and barely survives that because someone sees him crossing the road and thinks to themselves, "Hey, wouldn't it be fun to run a guy over?" Because that's how their morality rolls in this society. And so he does eventually cross the street, and he still has a few books with him from his house. When he left, he took some books with him, so he does have a few, and he ends up heading over to Faber's house. On his way, remember, the last thing he did just before getting to Faber's was to plant a book in one of the other guys' houses, one of the other firemen's houses, which is kind of crazy. Also of importance, while he is on the run, before he crosses the street, he decides that he's got to look nice to cross the street, because if people see a man who's all disheveled running across the street, they're going to think something's wrong. So he wants to be able to casually walk across the street looking normal, and after all, he did just burn down his house with a flamethrower, so he's probably sooty and stuff. So he stops in a garage, a gas station bathroom, and cleans up. And while he's in that gas station bathroom, just before he crosses the superhighway, he hears on the radio an announcement, a very important announcement, that the war will begin. The war has begun. So the war is on now. What that means, we don't exactly know, but a nationwide announcement's been made that the country is now at war. So he then crosses the street, and then he plants a book at a fireman's house because he happens to be passing by, I think the guy's name is Black. Stoneman and Black were the other two firemen, and he happens to be passing by Black's house and says, "You know what, I'm just going to put a book in his house and call in an alarm." He calls in an alarm, and he hears the fire engines roaring up to come burn Black's house down. So we're on page 124, right at after the little space there where it says Faber. "Faber!" Another rap, a whisper, and a long waiting. Then, after a minute, a small light flickered inside Faber's small house. After another pause, the back door opened. They stood looking at each other in the half-light, Faber and Montag, as if each did not believe in the other's existence. Then Faber moved and put out his hand and grabbed Montag and moved him in and sat him down and went back and stood in the door, listening. The sirens were wailing off in the morning distance. He came in and shut the door. Montag said, "I've been a fool all down the line. I can't stay. I'm on my way, God knows where." "Well, at least you were a fool about the right things," said Faber. "I thought you were dead. The audio capsule I gave you, burnt," said Montag. I heard the captain talking to you, and suddenly there was nothing. I almost came out looking for you myself." "The captain's dead. He found the audio capsule, and he heard your voice. He was going to trace it. I killed him with a flamethrower." So that's kind of a big revelation. Faber's finding out that Montag just killed Captain Beatty with a flamethrower, and so Faber's like, "Oh, wow, okay, yeah, you're in trouble." Faber sat down and did not speak for a time. "My God, how did this happen?" said Montag. "It was only the other night. Everything was fine, and next thing I know, I'm drowning. How many times can a man go down and still be alive? I feel like I can't breathe. There's Beatty dead, and he was my friend once. And there's Millie gone, and I thought she was my wife, but now I don't know. And the house all burnt, and my job gone, and myself on the run, and I planted a book in a fireman's house on the way here. Good Christ, the things I've done in a single week." "You did what you had to do. It was coming on for a long time," said Faber. "Yes, I believe that. If there's nothing else, I believe. It saved itself up to happen. I could feel it for a long time. I was saving something up. I went around doing one thing and feeling another. God, it was all there. It's a wonder it didn't show on me like fat. And here I am, messing up your life too. They might follow me here." So he says, "I've been storing this up for a long time." That would explain why he's been stealing the books for a year. Remember, when he goes to the air vent in his house, he pulls out 20 books. He didn't do that all in one night. He's been stealing books for quite a while. So there's been something growing inside him. This idea that maybe burning books isn't good has been growing for a while. Clarice kind of brought it to a head, but it was growing there all the while. "Ah, yes, but I feel alive for the first time in years," said Faber. "I feel I'm doing what I should have done a lifetime ago. For a little while I'm not afraid. Maybe it's because I'm doing the right thing at last, or maybe it's because I've done a rash thing and I don't want to look like a coward to you now. I suppose I'll have to do even more violent things, exposing myself so I won't fall down on the job and turn scared again. But what are your plans, Montag?" "To keep running." "You know the war's on." "Yes, I heard." "Oh, God, isn't it funny?" said the old man. "It seems so remote because we have our own troubles." "I haven't even had time to think about it." Montag drew out $100. "Here, I want this to stay with you. Use it any way that'll help when I'm gone." "But—" "Oh, I might be dead by noon. Use it." Faber nodded. "You'd better head for the river, if you can. Follow along it, and if you can hit the old railroad line going out into the country, follow them. Even though practically everything's airborne these days, and most of the tracks are abandoned, the rails are still there, rusting. I've heard there are still camps all across the country here and there. Walking camps, they call them, and if you keep walking far enough and keep an eye peeled, they say there's lots of old Harvard degrees on the tracks between here and Los Angeles. Most of them are wanted and hunted in the cities, but they survive, I guess. There aren't many of them, and I guess the government's never considered them great enough danger to go in and track them down. You might hold up with them for a time and get in touch with me in St. Louis. I'm leaving on a 5 a.m. bus this morning to see a retired printer there. I'm getting out into the open myself at last. This money will be put to good use, Montag. Thank you, and God bless you. Do you want to sleep a few minutes?" "No, I'd better run." "Let's check." All right, so what does he mean? There's camps all across the country. He says there's walking camps, they call them. If you keep walking far enough and keep an eye peeled, they say there's lots of old Harvard degrees on the tracks between here and L.A. Remember, I told you it takes place in San Diego. So if you can find the railway line, Montag, that leads to L.A., perhaps you'll be able to find one of these camps of people who live out there, and there's lots of old Harvard degrees. He doesn't mean that somebody has literally taken degrees from Harvard and scattered them out on the railroad tracks. He means there's old professors, not necessarily all from Harvard, but old professors who are out of work, like Faber himself, who can't survive in the cities because the government wouldn't want them participating in regular society. So instead, he says, well, look, there's definitely people living out there, smart people who the government would want to track down if they were in the cities, but they don't really care about them as long as they're outside of the city. So maybe you could find a group of those guys, some retired professors or people who are not into the counterculture, that's not into living by current society's rules. "Do you want to sleep a few minutes?" "No, I'd better run," said Montag. "Well, let's check." He took Montag quickly into the bedroom and lifted a picture frame aside, revealing a television screen the size of a postcard. "I always wanted a small television, something very small, something I could walk to, something I could blot out with the palm of my hand if necessary. Nothing that could shout me down, nothing monstrous big, so you see." He snapped it on. "Montag," the TV set was saying, and it lit up. "That's Montag. The name was spelled out by a voice. "Guy Montag, still running. Police helicopters are up. A new mechanical hound has been brought in from another district." Montag and Faber looked at each other. "The mechanical hound never fails. Never since its first use in tracking quarry has this incredible invention made a mistake. Tonight, this network is proud to have the opportunity to follow the hound by camera helicopter as it starts on its way to the target." Okay, so a TV announcer guy comes on and starts saying, "Montag, we're going on a hunt for Montag." So this is kind of like the invention of reality TV. It's cops live. All right, they're gonna follow the hound, and the hound is gonna sniff out Montag everywhere he's been, everywhere he went. And so when they announce that there's a hound, Montag and Faber look at each other like, uh-oh. That hound is going to smell everywhere you went, Montag, and they're going to figure it out. They're going to find out that you stopped here. So now Faber is a little worried because they could definitely find out that Montag was here. Faber poured 2 glasses of whiskey. We'll need these. They drank. Nose so sensitive, the mechanical hound can remember and identify 10,000 odor indexes on 10,000 men without resetting itself. Faber trembled the least bit and looked around his house, at the walls, at the door, the doorknob, and the chair where Montag now sat. Montag saw his look. They both looked quickly about the house, and Montag could feel his nostrils dilate, and he knew that he was trying to track himself, and his nose was suddenly good enough to sense a path he had made in the air of the room, and the sweat of his hand hung from the doorknob, invisible but as numerous as the jewels of a small chandelier. He was everywhere, in and on and about everything. He was like a luminous cloud, a ghost that made breathing once more impossible. He saw Faber stop up his own breath for fear of drawing that ghost into his own body, perhaps being contaminated with the phantom exhalations and odors of a running man. So all of a sudden they're sitting there and they're like, oh man, the hound's coming. And the hound can smell really good. So Montag's like, oh my gosh, if I were the hound, I could smell myself there. I could smell myself there. I could smell myself there. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And Faber's like practically holding his breath like, oh, I don't want to breathe in any Montag air in case it can smell my own, in case somehow it could smell Montag on Faber's lungs. The mechanical hound is now landing by helicopter at the site of the burning. And there on the small screen was the burnt house and the crowd and something with a sheet over it, and out of the sky, fluttering, came the helicopter, like a grotesque flower. So they must have their game out, thought Montag. The circus must go on, even with the war beginning within the hour. He watched the scene, fascinated, not wanting to move. It seemed so remote in no part of him. It was like a play, apart and separate, wondrous to watch, not without its strange pleasure. That's all for me, he thought. That's all taking place just for me, by God. Now, this part gets a little weird. So he's watching on TV the start of the chase to track himself down. So that's kind of weird. It's like watching yourself in a video, except you're not actually in the video yet. You know you're going to make an entrance, and it's happening live, and he knows that they're coming after him starting now. So he starts thinking to himself, if I wanted to, I could just give myself up, and I could be the first man in history to watch myself killed on national television, because they'll find their way here. They're going to know that I came here. And then when they get here, I could just take Faber's little postcard-sized television and go over to the window and wave out up at the cameras and wave to everybody and say, hey, they're going to kill me. And I could watch myself die. That's what he's talking about in this paragraph, how he could watch himself die. And then he thinks to himself, if I do that, if I choose to do that, what would I say? I would have time for like a real quick message. What would I say to the world in that 3 or 4 seconds that could wake everyone up, that could make them realize they're living their lives pointlessly, meaninglessly? And he thinks, he doesn't actually say this, but normally I would have you do like a journal entry on this, but I'll just tell you. Something that he could say, what was said to him? What did Clarice say to him? Are you happy? So maybe he could go, okay, I'm going to die. He could wave, look out the window, see himself on TV, and just before the hound pounces on him, he could say, are you happy? And scream it into the TV. And maybe the people will wake up and realize, some of them might realize, like, wait a second, maybe I'm not happy. Just like he did. If he wished, he could linger here in comfort and follow the entire hunt on through its swift phases, down alleys, across streets, over empty running avenues, crossing lots and playgrounds with pauses here or there for the necessary commercials, up other alleys to the burning house of Mr. and Mrs. Black, and so on to this house with Faber and himself seated, drinking, while the electric hound snuffed down the last trail, silent as a drift of death itself, skidding to a halt outside that window there. Then, if he wished, Montag might rise, walk to the window, keep one eye on the TV screen, open the window, lean out, look back, and see himself, dramatized, described, made over, standing there, limed in bright small television screen from outside, a drama to be watched objectively, knowing that in other parlors he was as large as life, in full color, dimensionally perfect, and if he kept his eye peeled quickly, he would see himself, an instant before oblivion, being punctured for the benefit of how many civilian parlor-sitters who had been awakened from sleep a few minutes ago by the frantic sirening of their living-room walls to come and watch the big game, the hunt, the one-man carnival. Would he have time for a speech? as the hound seized him in view of 10 or 20 or 30 million people. Mightn't he sum up his entire life in the last week in one single phrase or a word that would stay with them long after the hound had turned, clenching him in its metal-pliered jaws, and trotted off into darkness while the camera remained stationary, watching the creature dwindle in the distance, a splendid fade-out? What could he say in a single word, a few words that would sear all their faces and wake them up? So he thinks about this for a minute. He thinks, like, what could I do? What could I say? He doesn't come up with the idea, are you happy? That's my idea. But he thinks to himself, I could just wait here and die and try to, like, save, maybe I'd save more people that way. There, whispered Faber, and out of a helicopter glided something that was not machine, not animal, not dead, not alive, glowing with a pale green luminosity. It stood near the smoking ruins of Montag's house, and the men brought his discarded flamethrower to it and put it down under the muzzle of the hound. There was a whirring, a clicking, a humming. Montag shook his head and got up and drank the rest of his drink. It's time. I'm sorry about this. About what? Me? My house? No, I deserve everything. Run, for God's sakes. Perhaps I can delay them here. Wait, said Montag. There's no use in you being discovered. When I leave, burn the spread of this bed that I touch. Burn the chair in the living room and your wall incinerator. Wipe down the furniture with alcohol. Wipe the doorknobs. Burn the throw rug in the parlor. Turn the air conditioning on full in all the rooms, and spray with moth spray if you have it. Then turn on your lawn sprinklers as high as they'll go, and hose off the sidewalks. Why, with any luck at all, we could kill the trail in here anyway. Faber shook his hand. I'll tend to it. Good luck. If we're both in good health next week, the week after, get in touch with me. General delivery, St. Louis. I'm sorry there's no way I can go with you this time by earphone. That was good for both of us. But my equipment was limited. You see, I never thought I'd use it. What a silly old man. No thought there. Ah, stupid, stupid. So, I don't have another green bullet, the right kind to put into your head. Go, now. So, he says, well, they might not discover that I came inside here. Maybe if you turn your sprinklers on and you burn everything that I touched and wipe everything down with alcohol, they won't be able to, the hound won't be able to smell. So he's going to try that so that Faber doesn't have to run too. One last thing, said Montag. Quick, a suitcase. Get it. Fill it with your dirtiest clothes, an old suit. The dirtier the better. A shirt, some old sneakers, socks. Faber was gone and back in a minute. They sealed the cardboard valise with clear tape. To keep the ancient odor of Mr. Faber in, of course, said Faber, sweating at the job. So he asked for some clothes because he's going to have to change. He doesn't want to change yet, but he's going to change. So he gets all of Faber's old clothes, and he's going to bring it in a cardboard valise, which is just a suitcase. And he even tapes it shut so that none of Faber's smell will leave with him. So he's going to run away, and when he gets somewhere safe, he's going to get out of his own Montag clothes and put on some Faber clothes so he doesn't smell like himself. Montag doused the exterior of the valise with whiskey. I don't want that hound picking up two odors at once. May I take this whiskey? I'll need it later. Christ, I hope this works. They shook hands again, and going out the door, glanced at the TV. The hound was on its way, followed by the hovering helicopter cameras, silently sniffing the great night wind. It was running down the first alley. Goodbye. And Montag was out the back door, lightly running, with the half-empty valise. Behind him he heard the lawn sprinkling system jump up, filling the dark air with rain that fell gently and then with a steady pour all around, washing off the sidewalks and draining into the alley. He carried a few drops of this rain with him on his face. He thought he heard the old man call goodbye, but he wasn't certain. He ran very fast away from the house, down toward the river. So, in case you don't know, water doesn't, you can't smell stuff through water, so hosing off the sidewalks hopefully will work, and with the sprinkler system, and heading to the river. If he can just get to the river, he thinks he'll be safe. So that's, we're on page 130 now. Now this part is about his run. It's interesting the way that Bradbury goes about it. He's running away. Montag ran. He could feel the hound, like autumn, come cold and dry and swift, like a wind that didn't stir, that didn't jar windows or disturb leaf shadows on the white sidewalks as it passed. The hound did not touch the world. It carried its silence with it, so you could feel the silence building up a pressure behind you all across town. Montag felt the pressure rising and ran. So he feels like a bullet is after him, but it's a far away, and this bullet's going to slowly find him and catch up to him, and he's got to get to his destination before this bullet catches him. It's just a weird feeling for him. He stopped for breath on his way to the river, to peer through dimly lit windows of wakened houses, and he saw the silhouettes of people inside watching their parlor walls, and there on the walls was the mechanical hound, a breath of neon vapor, spidering along, here and gone, now at Elm Terrace, Lincoln, Oak, Park, and up the alley toward Faber's house. Go past, thought Montag. Don't stop. Go on, don't turn in. On the parlor wall, Faber's house, with its sprinkler system pulsing in the night air. The hound paused, quivering. No, Montag held to the window. This way, here. The procaine needle flicked out and in. A single clear drop of the stuff of dreams fell from the needle as it vanished in the hound's muzzle. So as he's running away, he's passing house after house. He says, you know what, I'm going to just look in one of these houses and see what's going on, because they're going to have the show on. So he looks in the house, and he can see the hound coming up to Faber's house and pausing in front of his house like, I kind of smell Montag. Montag didn't want to take any Faber smell with him. That's why he had the sealed suitcase. So he left his own scent trail out the back door of Faber's, and so hopefully he's thinking, hopefully the hound will just pass on by Faber's house and just stick on my trail. And for a moment there, the hound kind of does that thing with the needle in its mouth, like, maybe I'll go inside and kill Faber. Maybe I won't. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. But it doesn't. Montag held his breath like a doubled fist in his chest. The mechanical hound turned and plunged away from Faber's house down the alley again. Montag snapped his gaze to the sky. The helicopters were closer now, a great blowing of insects to a single light source. With an effort, Montag reminded himself again that this was no fictional episode to be watched on his run to the river. It was, in actuality, his own chess game he was witnessing, move by move. He shouted to give himself the necessary push away from this last house window. So it was the last house before he gets to the thing, and he's watching through the window, and he says, all right, I gotta go now. I gotta push myself away from watching my own pursuit. He shouted to give himself the necessary push away from this last house window and the fascinating seance going on in there. Hell, he shouted, and he was away and gone. The alley, a street, the smell of the river, leg out, leg down, leg out, leg down. 20 million Montags running soon, if the cameras caught him. 20 million Montags running like an ancient Keystone comedy, cops and robbers, chasers in the chase, hunters in the hunted. He had seen it 1,000 times. Behind him now, 20 million silently baying hounds ricocheted across parlor walls, 3 cushions shooting from right wall, center wall, left wall gone, right wall, center wall, left wall gone. So he's imagining how it must look in the houses. There's 20 million people watching the show, he thinks, and if the cameras catch a glimpse of him, there'll be 20 million Montags, 20 million people putting themselves in his shoes, saying either run or go, no, get him, in the hound's shoes, get him. And so he imagines how it will look at the TV at home, which he burned his house down. But if you had 3 TV walls, it would be like the hound is here, then 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 here. The hound is like shooting across your living room as you're watching it, boom, 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 and running after Montag. Okay. Montag jammed his seashell into his ear. Police suggest the entire population in the Elm Terrace area do as follows. Everyone, in every house, in every street, open a front or rear door, or look from the windows. The fugitive cannot escape if everyone in the next minute looks from his house. Ready? Oh, of course. Why hadn't they done this before? Why in all the years hadn't this game been tried? Everyone up, everyone out. He couldn't be missed. The only man running alone in the night. The only man proving his legs. At the count of 10 now. 1, 2. So as he's listening to the thing, he hears the announcer say, everybody go out and look around your yards, or look out the window at least. If you're worried that this guy is dangerous, then just look outside and see if you see him. That might sound silly, but that is how they found the Boston bombers, the guys who, their names are the Tsarnaev brothers. They were actually busted because the police in a certain area thought that they knew the Tsarnaev brothers would be in this neighborhood, so they made an announcement for people to look around outside and see if anything was off, anything was weird. And a guy noticed that his boat, which he had sealed with, like, in the wintertime, usually you put like a giant seal over the top of the boat, a tarp, and he noticed that the tarp was moved a little bit in one spot, and sure enough, the Tsarnaev brothers had moved the tarp, and they were laying on the top of his boat. So that's what's going on here. The announcer says, everybody go look out your windows and see if you see this guy. At the count of 10, now. 1, 2. Montag could feel the city rise. 3. He felt the city turn to its 1,000 doors. 4. The people sleepwalking in their hallways. 5. He felt their hands on the doorknobs. The smell of the river was cool and like a solid rain. His throat was burnt rust and his eyes wept dry with running. He yelled as if this yell would jet him on, fling him the last 100 yards. 6. 7, 8. The doorknobs turned on 5,000 doors. 9. He ran out away from the last row of houses, on a slope leading down to a solid moving blackness. 10. The doors opened. I like this paragraph. He imagined thousands on thousands of faces peering into yards, into alleys, and into the sky. Faces hidden by curtains, pale night-frightened faces like gray animals peering from electric caves. Faces with gray colorless eyes, gray tongues, and gray thoughts looking out through the numb flesh of the face. But he was at the river. He touched it just to be sure it was real. He waded in and stripped in darkness to the skin, splashed his body, arms, legs, and head with raw liquor, drank it in, snuffed some up his nose. Then he dressed in Faber's old clothes and shoes. He tossed his own clothing into the river and watched it be swept away. Then, holding the suitcase, he walked out into the river until there was no bottom, and he was swept away in the dark. Boom. So that's his runaway. He gets away. He gets to the river. I like that thing about how all of a sudden all these people who are asleep, who hardly can pull themselves away from the TV, all open their front doors and go look outside. And it's kind of interesting because all of a sudden 5,000 people are noticing outdoors, which is kind of what he wanted. He wanted to wake people up. Well, now they're awake and they're thinking that they're looking for a person, but all of a sudden they're just looking outdoors and observing outside. It may not stick with any of them, but at least he's gotten them all up and looking outdoors, kind of the way Clarice was observant about nature. So in his run away from the city, he's able to have some positive impact, that people step outside for a minute and look around and observe nature. He was 300 yards downstream when the hound reached the river. Overhead, a great racketing fans of helicopters hovered. A storm of light fell upon the river, and Montag dove under the great illumination as if the sun had broken in through the clouds. He felt the river pull him further on its way into darkness. Then the lights switched back to the land. The helicopters swerved over the city again as if they picked up another trail. They were gone. The hound was gone. Now there was only the cold river and Montag floating in a sudden peacefulness, away from the city and the lights and the chase. Away from everything. So he gets away. The helicopters do arrive, and they shoot light down onto the river, but they can't find him. He dives under, and nobody knows where Montag is. But the chase hasn't ended. The chase turns back inland, away from the river. He felt as if he had left a stage behind, and many actors. He felt as if he had left the great seance and all the murmuring ghosts. He was moving from an unreality that was frightening into a reality that was unreal because it was new. So what does that mean? He was, a seance is like when you try to gather around and like resurrect dead people or something. You like try to talk to the dead people, right? He says he felt as if he had left a great seance and all the murmuring ghosts. He's comparing society where he was in San Diego, the culture of the area, the city, to a seance. Like all the people that were in the city were the dead people, and now he left and he's going out into the country where there will be living people, where there's still people who have to like milk cows and take their dogs for a walk. He's going to go and be out in reality now, and that city life that he's coming from was an unreality. The black land slid by, and he was going into the country, in and among the hills. For the first time in a dozen years, the stars were coming out above him in great processions of wheeling fire. He saw a great juggernaut of stars form in the sky and threaten to roll over and crush him. Okay, to us that sounds kind of silly. It's not the first time in a dozen years the stars have come out. It's just the first time in a dozen years he's noticed the stars. I don't know if you know this, but when you live in a large city, there's so much light from the city. Sometimes they actually call it light pollution. There's so much light from the city that you can't actually see any stars. You can sometimes see the moon. You can see the moon, but you can't really see the stars unless you can somehow it's like when you're in your house at night and you have the light on in your bedroom and you try to look out through your bedroom window to see something, you can't see anything because you're inside the light and you can't see outside of it. Well, once you shut off that light in your bedroom and then you go to the window, now you can see outside. So it's the same thing. He's outside of the city now. That whole, like if a city is just covered in light, the city, he's outside of the light dome of the city. And so he can actually see stars coming out for the first time, he says, in a dozen years since he was 18, because remember, he's 30. So he hasn't seen stars in forever. And he says it feels like they're going to roll over and crush him. That's how odd it feels for him to see stars. I have a metaphor, but I'll wait till we get to the next part. He floated on his back when the suitcase filled and sank. The river was mild and leisurely, going away from the people who ate shadows for breakfast and steam for lunch and vapor for supper. The river, on the other hand, was real, very real. It held him comfortably and gave him the time at last, the leisure to consider this month, this year, and a lifetime of years. He listened to his heart slow, his thoughts stopped rushing with his blood. He saw the moon low in the sky now, the moon there, and the light of the moon. Caused by what? By the sun, of course. But what lights the sun? Its own fire, and the sun goes on, day after day, burning and burning. The sun and time, the sun and time and burning. Burning. The river bobbled him along gently. Burning. The sun and every clock on earth, it all came together and became a single thing in his mind. After a long time of floating on the land and a short time of floating in the river, he knew why he must never burn again in his life. So finally, he's laying in the river, and he's finally got some time to think, and he's just floating down the river. We don't know for how long. He sees the stars come out, and finally it occurs to him, I have to stop being a fireman. He doesn't have that option of going back to being a fireman, but in his mind, he finally says to himself, okay, yeah, I can't ever burn things again. I shouldn't burn things. And listen to what he says. He said, burning, the sun and every clock on earth, it all came together and became a single thing in his mind. Now, this might mess with your mind a little bit, but if you think about it, picture our solar system. You got the sun in the middle, you got Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, all the planets just orbiting around further and further and further from the sun, all doing their orbits, right? If you think about our solar system, it's kind of like a giant clock. That's what he realizes. He's like, you know what? With the sun at the middle and the earth going, our solar system is like a giant clock. And it burns, but it doesn't burn material. It burns time. It burns time. So sooner or later, time will burn everything out. Everything in the world can burn. So if everything can burn, then I should be trying to stop the burning. That's what I should be doing. I should be trying to preserve things. So that's his realization as he's lying there, that the entire universe is really just one giant clock ticking away, and it's burning, and that he doesn't want to be on the side of encouraging the burning. He wants to be on the side of preventing burning. That's what he's realizing. The sun burned every day. It burned time. The world rushed in a circle and turned on its axis, and time was busy burning the years and the people anyway, without any help from him. So if he burned things with the fireman and the sun burned time, that meant that everything could be burned. Well, one of them had to stop burning. The sun certainly wouldn't. So it looked as if it would have to be Montag and the people he had worked with until a few short hours ago. Somewhere the saving and putting away had to begin again, and someone had to do the saving and the keeping, one way or another, in books, in records, in people's heads, any way at all, so long as it was safe, free from moth, silverfish, rust, and dry rot, and men with matches. The world was full of burning of all types and sizes. Now the Guild of the Asbestos Weaver must open shop very soon. So you're probably like, what is the Guild of the Asbestos Weaver? What he's talking about? He says, well, I'm going to stop burning. I'm going to start saving. I'm going to start putting things away. I'm going to start trying to remember things or writing them down, maybe even write books. And he says, we have to keep knowledge safe from men with matches, silverfish, rust, dry rot. Those are things that would wear away books. He says, the world is full of burning of all types and sizes. Now the Guild of the Asbestos Weaver must open shop very soon. We have it in our heads, as I told you, I think before when they mentioned asbestos, that asbestos is bad because it can cause cancer, and so we think of it as terrible. But back in the 50s when asbestos was first discovered and they started putting in every blessed building they could, they thought asbestos was a miracle thing because it would prevent the spread of fire from level to level in buildings. So that's why they put it in the roofs, or depending on how you view it, the ceilings of every floor in every high-rise. So they started using asbestos. At the time Bradbury wrote the book, in 1951, or 52 he was writing, asbestos was still considered to be like a miracle thing because it prevented the spread of fire. If you would coat your pipes in it and coat your ceiling and all kinds of stuff in it, it would prevent the spread of fire. So when he says the Guild of the Asbestos Weaver must open shop very soon, a guild is like a union, like teachers have a union or auto workers have a union. They unionize, right? So he says the Guild of the Asbestos Weaver is people have to start getting together and coating books in asbestos so they won't burn. That's what he's talking about. We're going to have to start coding our, but not literally, he means metaphorically. We're going to have to start bringing back books. Stop burning the darn things and bringing them back. He felt his heel bump land, touch pebbles and rocks, scrape sand. The river had moved him towards the shore. He looked in at the great black creature, without eyes or without light, without shape, with only a size that went 1,000 miles without wanting to stop, with its grass hills and forests that were waiting for him. He hesitated to leave the comforting flow of the water. He expected to find the hound there. Suddenly the trees might blow under and a great wind of helicopters would form. But there was only the normal autumn wind high up, going by like another river. Why wasn't the hound running? Why had the search veered back inland? Montag listened. Nothing. Nothing. Millie, he thought. All this country here. Listen to it. Nothing and nothing. So much silence, Millie. I wonder how you'd take it. Would you shout, shut up, shut up? Millie. And he was sad. So that's kind of interesting because you and I might think, when Millie left the house, if you remember, she left the house and he's standing there with the flamethrower getting ready to burn the thing down. And he's like, Millie, you didn't call in the alarm, did you? She doesn't answer him. She just gets in the taxi and drives away. And then Beatty later tells him, yeah, actually it was your wife that phoned in the alarm. So you and I might think, okay, that's unforgivable. I don't forgive her. But he still forgives her. He thinks that she was under the influence of, culture, and he's willing to forgive her. He's like, oh man, Millie, I wish you were here. And he says, he finishes with, and he was sad. He wishes that things were different between him and Millie. Which is kind of interesting because that kind of indicates that he forgives her. But Millie was not here, and the hound was not here. But the dry smell of hay blowing from some distant field put Montag on the land. He remembered a farm he had visited when he was very young, one of the few rare times he discovered that somewhere behind the 7 veils of unreality, beyond the walls of the parlors, and beyond the tin moat of the city, cows chewed grass and pigs sat in warm ponds at noon and dogs barked after white sheep on a hill. Now, the dry smell of hay, the motion of waters, made him think of sleeping in fresh hay. Okay, this whole part is very weird, and it's like 2 pages. He kind of goes off. He steps out of the shore of the river and onto the land, and he takes one breath and one smell. Have you ever had that happen where you take a smell of something and it reminds you so powerfully or so strongly of something, and you can remember something because of a smell? It's rare. It's much more rare than a sight, but it's happened to me where you get a smell and you're like, oh wow, that smells just like something. This girl I used to date always used to burn incense, and if I ever smell a certain type of incense burning, I always think of, oh man, it's just like when I used to date that girl and we'd hang out and she'd always be burning incense. It's the same thing. He steps out, he smells hay, and he's like, oh man, I remember going out to a farm one time. I don't know, it doesn't say on a field trip, but I assume like it was on a field trip or something from school, and where they learned about farm life and pigs and dogs and cats and stuff. And he says that smell of the hay is what makes him remember that. And then all of a sudden, for like 2 pages, he's like in a daze, in a daydream here. And it's not actually happening. It's a little confusing. He starts thinking about the future, not necessarily the immediate future, but how he'll live now. And he imagines himself finding a farmhouse and someone coming and kind of tending and taking care of him. Not really like physically, but just leaving him food and letting him stay in their barn. So that's what he's thinking. This doesn't actually happen, but that's what he's imagining as he's standing there smelling the hay. Now the dry smell of hay, the motion of the waters, made him think of sleeping in fresh hay in a lonely barn away from loud highways, behind a quiet farmhouse and under an ancient windmill that whirred like the sound of the passing years overhead. He would lay in the high barn loft all night, listening to distant animals and insects and trees, the little motions and stirrings. And during the night, he thought, below the loft he would hear a sound like feet moving, perhaps. He would tense and sit up. The sound would move away. He would lie back and look out the loft window very late in the night and see the lights go out in the farmhouse itself, until a very young and beautiful woman would sit in an unlit window braiding her hair. It would be hard to see her, but her face would be like the face of the girl so long ago in his past now, so very long ago, the girl who had known the weather and never been burned by fireflies, the girl who had known what dandelions meant rubbed off on your chin. Then she would be gone from the warm window and appear again upstairs in her moon-whitened room, and then to the sound of death, the sound of jets cutting the sky in two black pieces beyond the horizon, he would lie in the loft, hidden and safe, watching those strange new stars over the rim of the earth fleeing from the soft color of dawn. In the morning he would not have needed sleep, for all the warm odors and sights of a complete country night would have rested and slept him while his eyes were wide and his mouth, when he thought to test it, was half a smile. And there at the bottom of the hayloft stair waiting for him would be the incredible thing. He would step carefully down in the pink light of early morning, so fully aware of the world that he would be afraid, and stand over the small miracle, and at last bend down to touch it. A cool glass of fresh milk, and a few apples and pears laid at the foot of the steps. This was all he wanted now, some sign that the immense world would accept him and give him the long time he needed to think of all the things he must think. A glass of milk, an apple, a pear. He stepped out from the river. So he imagines this situation. He gets the smell of hay, and all of a sudden he just imagines himself sleeping in a barn, and a girl who looks a lot like Clarice, maybe is Clarice, would come and leave him pears and milk at the bottom of the loft stairs and let him stay. They'd let him stay in their barn. And that's the thought that comes to him while he's on the thing. And then in the morning he would wake up and have a nice country breakfast of apples, pears, and milk. And that will refresh him, and that would be like that would be like paradise for him, not being in part of the city. He stepped from the river. So now we're back to reality. He's on the edge of the river. He's just gotten out after running away from the hound, and he's finding some land, and he's going to start walking. The land rushed at him like a tidal wave. He was crushed by darkness and the look of the country and the million odors on a wind that iced his body. He fell back under the breaking curve of darkness and sound and smell, his ears roaring. He whirled. The stars poured over his sight like flaming meteors. He wanted to plunge into the river again and let it idle him safely on down somewhere. This dark land rising was like that day in his childhood swimming, when from nowhere the largest wave in the history of remembering slammed him down in salt mud and green darkness, water burning mouth and nose, retching his stomach, screaming, "Too much water! Too much land." So this is like weird. Okay, have you ever gone down to the city, or any city, right? And you actually walk around among the buildings. Like if you go down to Times Square and you just, or maybe not Times Square, but you go down and if you've ever been to the Empire State Building, you stand at the bottom and you just look up for a second. You're like, wow, that is a really tall building. And then you look at the other buildings, you're just like, holy smokes. To a city person, that's no big deal because they're used to it. They're just like, yeah, whatever, there's buildings, big deal. Just like you and I, when we see a lot of land, when we see the mountains, we're just like, yeah, that's just the mountains, big deal. He steps out of the river because he's a city person and he sees all this land, fields in front of him. And he's just like, wow, that's a lot of land. Same way you and I would look up and go, man, that's a tall building. So it's kind of the opposite. And he's just like, holy smokes, that is a that's a lot of land out there. Then out of the black wall before him, a whisper, a shape, in the shape 2 eyes, the night looking at him, the forest seeing him, the hound. After all the running and rushing and sweating it out and half drowning, to come this far, work this hard, and think that you think yourself safe, and sigh with relief, and come out on the land at last, only to find the hound. Montag gave one last agonized shout, as if this were too much for any man to bear. But then the shape exploded away, the eyes vanished, the leaf piles flew up in a dry shower. Montag was alone in the wilderness. A deer. So he looks and he sees 2 eyes peering at him. He's like, oh man, the hound, no! And when he shouts, poof, something goes running off. He's like, oh, that wasn't the hound. That was just a deer. Whew! So he sees a deer, and it's still dark enough where he can't tell that it's not the hound, but he just assumed that the hound would be there waiting for him. He smelled the heavy musk-like perfume mingled with blood and the gummed exhalation of the animal's breath, all cardamom and moss and ragweed odor in his huge night where the trees ran at him, pulled away to the pulse of the heart behind his eyes. There must have been a billion leaves on the land. He waded in them, a dry river of leaves, smelling of hot cloves and warm dust and other smells. There was a smell like a cut potato from the land, raw and cold and white from having the moon on it most of the night. There was a smell like pickles from a bottle and a smell like parsley on the table at home. There was a faint yellow odor like mustard from a jar. There was a smell like carnations from the yard next door. He put down his hand and felt a weed rise up like a child brushing him. His fingers smelled of licorice. He stood breathing, and the more he breathed the land in, the more he was filled up with all the details of the land. He was not empty. There was more than enough here to fill him. There would always be more than enough. So he gets like this natural, like, kind of sense of fulfillment from stepping out of the river, seeing the land, and just realizing, like, wow, the world is so much bigger than my stupid little house and my stupid little three-wall television room and, burning books all day. It's just this giant world out here, and it will satisfy me. I don't have to worry that, the meaning I'm losing from burning books and being a fireman will somehow never come back, because I can tell right now, just from smelling this land, walking out here, seeing how beautiful it is, and how much land there is, that I'll be satisfied. There's another life for me somewhere out here. He walked in the shallow tide of leaves, stumbling, and in the middle of the strangeness, a familiarity. His foot hit something that rang dully. He moved his hand on the ground, a yard this way, a yard that. It was the railroad track. The track that came out of the city and rusted across the land through forests and woods deserted now by the river. Here was the path to wherever he was going. Here was the single familiar thing, the magic charm he might need a little while, to touch, to feel beneath his feet as he moved on into the bramble bushes and the lakes of smelling and feeling and touching, among the whispers and the blowing down of leaves. He walked on the tracks. He was surprised to learn how certain he suddenly was of a single fact he could not prove. Once, long ago, Clarice had walked here, where he was walking now. So, we'll pause there. He gets out of the river, he starts walking, and ding, his foot hits something under the leaves, the rivers of leaves, and he realizes, ooh, I found the railroad tracks, so I'm just going to walk along the railroad tracks and follow the river, maybe head towards LA. So we'll pause there for today, and Mrs. Mudge will tell you what you've got for the rest of class to do. All right, see y'all tomorrow.